The English media are an absolute disgrace. Aside from the fact that they love bigging people up, only to pull them right back down to where they came from at the first sign of adversity, they're a big reason for the ever-growing divide between players and fans, often creating an environment full of distrust, which in turn creates resentment for both parties. To a certain extent, you can't really blame them for doing things like creating clickbait headlines or partaking in transfer market gossip that they know is bollocks, because if they don't, they're likely to be left behind by the competition unless they're at the very top of their profession, like say a David Ornstein. What is unforgivable, however, is the thinly veiled racism we see from their end just before, during, and immediately after any international tournament. I'm not talking about what we all saw happen to Sancho, Rashford and Saka after the penalty shootout defeats Italy in the final of the last Euros. That was the fault of cretins on social media, many of whom were hiding behind anonymous profiles, deciding to play the prick and attack players for the color of their skin. My focus is instead on the specific players they use for their front cover depending on the result England have just had. Take the Iceland defeat at Wembley from a couple of days ago for instance. Bukayo Saka came on as a sub and played all of 25 minutes, yet he was the poster boy for England's defeat across multiple outlets. In fact, he wasn't even on the pitch when England conceded the goal, and some of his teammates like Phil Foden and Cole Palmer had absolute stinkers, yet little was said about them. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting I want to see white players getting taken to the cleaners either, but what I am asking for is a bit of neutrality when it comes to analysis, whereby ethnicity is completely irrelevant, with only performances on the pitch taken into account. A lot of this is a systematic failure based on historical prejudice, and you can't help but wonder when this will ever come to an end. An equal but opposite example was at the World Cup in Qatar. Saka had just scored a brace, Rashford netted what was the fastest goal off the bench in football tournament history, while Raheem Sterling bagged a golden assist against Iran. Yet Jack Grealish was the face of England's victory. The trouble here is that the media have a huge impact on how we see the world, whether consciously or subconsciously, and sneaky little tricks like this do an untold amount of damage on the fabric of society as a whole. 6 years ago, Adebayo and Foden were both coming through Man City's ranks and decided to purchase some property. The former was lambasted for spending £2 million despite having never started a Premier League game, while the latter was praised for buying his mother a house and setting himself up for the future. Both of them were young players starting up their careers at the same time, but the contrast in messaging couldn't have been any more different. Another thing I've noticed is that a lot of racism tends to be personality dependent. When you've got a shy, quiet and humble character like N'Golo Kante, you're only ever likely to hear good things, whereas someone a bit more colorful and flamboyant, such as Paul Pogba, constantly gets pulled up. That's not to say white players aren't targeted either. Perhaps the two who've had to face the most amount of vitriol from the press have been Wayne Rooney and David Beckham, but having a pop at them was made easier by the fact that they were absolute global icons, and thus any pieces with their names in would always get eyeballs. Harry Kane's penalty miss versus France didn't create half as many headlines as the ones from Euro 2020, and it's quite possible race had something to do with it. As much as I love Kane, he's the same bloke who refused to train with Spurs for weeks before deciding to get in front of camera with Gary Neville while playing golf and reiterating his desire to leave the club. Anyone else, and they would be labeled as unprofessional, but because the press made Kane their golden boy, he came out of that entire episode unscathed. There's not an awful lot you and I can do about it as members of the public, except be a little more aware of what we're reading and the potential reasons behind it moving forward. Peace.